At 12:01 a.m. on March 6, 2025, a single sentence in a White House proclamation flipped a decades-old partnership on its head. Every vehicle or part rolling out of Canada would now pay a 25% toll to cross into the United States. Within 60 seconds, assembly lines that had pulsed like metronomes from Windsor to Oshawa shuddered, lurched, and stopped. In Detroit, dashboard monitors that tracked incoming subassemblies blinked from green to red. The hum in cavernous body shops flattened into a hush so total you could hear a drill drop 2 bays away. Truck convoys already in motion slammed into mile-long queues at the Ambassador Bridge. Drivers killed their engines and stepped onto asphalt still warm from yesterday's traffic, staring at the silent ribbon of steel and river that now felt like an iron curtain. In corporate war rooms from Toronto to Dearborn, executives watched real-time dashboards fill with red ink and tried to calculate how long a supply chain can hold its breath. For years, politicians bragged that North America's auto network was seamless, 30,000 parts dancing across borders in perfect time. Tonight, that choreography shattered. The question wasn't just who would pay an extra $7.5 grand on a $30,000 sedan. It was whether the entire ballet had been an illusion from the start. But the midnight silence was only Act 1. What followed was a shockwave that ripped through boardrooms, border booths, and kitchen tables alike. And it all started in that first quiet minute, when the lights were still on, the machines were still ready, and nobody yet believed the ballet was over. Next up, the midnight shockwave that turned a tariff notice into an industrial freefall. The proclamation wasn't even 4 paragraphs long, but its payload was seismic. As of 0001 a.m. ET on March 6, 2025, every sedan, SUV, light truck, engine, or wiring harness stamped Made in Canada would pay an extra 25% to enter the United States. Automakers were given a 2-year grace window to yank production back onto U.S. soil, fail, and the tariff would hit parts as hard as finished cars. Boardrooms reacted like trading floors in freefall. At 12:07 a.m., a Detroit supply chain dashboard that normally glowed green flipped to a wall of red alerts. By 12:15, executives on a hastily convened cross-border video call fought over speaker time. A leaked recording later caught a senior Ford strategist growling, "We just taxed ourselves out of our own factories." Rumors spread that the White House would hand out offset credits for domestically assembled content. But nobody knew the fine print. And markets hate riddles. Pundits filled the vacuum with motives. Trade hawks framed the levy as a national security squeeze on fentanyl routes. Election analysts called it pure optics, aimed at Midwest swing states. Reuters calculated that the move might raise U.S. sticker prices by $5,000 per vehicle, and still gut margins to near zero. A double blow that left Wall Street bewildered and Main Street furious. Inside plants, the math turned brutal. A $30K crossover built in Oshawa now carried $5K in border costs. Eat it, and profits vanished, pass it on, and customers bolted. Suppliers had hours, not months, to decide which contracts to honor, renegotiate, or shred. One Ontario CFO summed it up in an email that later leaked to reporters. "Our entire balance sheet changed while the coffee was still hot. Yet spreadsheets were only the first domino. The next collapse, truck lines idling at the Ambassador Bridge, customs queues crawling for miles, would prove even more lethal. Because when a supply chain built for just-in-time turns into just sit tight, every cog from corporate tower to corner diner feels the jolt." The first sign of trouble wasn't a factory siren. It was the red glow of brake lights stretching from the Ambassador Bridge halfway back to Highway 401. Before dawn, convoys that once cruised across the Detroit River every 7 minutes were frozen in place, their diesel rumble replaced by drivers pacing asphalt and swapping rumors about new paperwork no one's seen yet. Border officers, suddenly gatekeepers of a 25% levy, could clear barely a fifth of their usual volume. Every idle hour bled roughly $50 million from cross-border trade. Why the instant gridlock? A modern vehicle packs approximately 30,000 individual parts, many of which ricochet between Canada, the US, and Mexico several times before a single customer turns a key. A piston cast in Ontario might head south for machining, west for heat treating, north again for final assembly, earning a tariff bill at every hop. One analyst called it death by toll booth. When tariffs compound on up to 6 crossings per component, profit turns to red ink by the second shipment. That cascading math blew up the industry's golden rule: just-in-time manufacturing. For decades, parts arrived mere hours before installation, trimming inventories to razor stubble. Suddenly, that elegant ballet looked more like underwater choreography, every movement distorted, every breath harder to take. Experts who once praised lean flowcharts now urged companies to hoard anything you can store. Inside cabs, the human toll mounted. One Windsor trucker live-streamed a 17-hour wait, his dashboard GPS painting a motionless blue dot, while production lines 20 kilometers away burned $100,000 per minute in downtime fees. Dispatchers pinged drivers with frantic reroutes, only to learn that customs computers were timing out under the flood of reclassified invoices. A problem even border agent unions warned could paralyze freight if staffing didn't triple. The choke point grew so dire that executives considered chartering cargo jets for steering racks and dashboards, an option 10 times pricier than road freight but still cheaper than shuttering a plant. Yet paperwork followed the parts into the sky. Anything stamped Canada still triggered the toll on landing in Chicago or Cleveland. The very geography that once gave Detroit-Windsor its advantage had flipped into a moat of bureaucratic quicksand. And while corporate war rooms battled spreadsheets, whole communities watched traffic cams like weather reports, praying the ribbon of trucks would thin. It never did. The jam became the prophecy. If the border couldn't breathe, neither could Windsor's factories. By sunrise, the beating heart of Canada's auto belt had slipped into an eerie coma. Stellantis's Windsor assembly, once a 24-hour symphony of presses and paint booths, was supposed to pause for routine retooling. Instead, the gates stayed chained, sending approximately 3,500 workers home with no clock-in date on their slips. The silence spread faster than any press release. Within days, an additional 4,500 layoffs rippled across nearby suppliers, and union leaders warned that as many as 12,000 parts plant jobs had already evaporated in Windsor's slipstream. Up the highway, General Motors froze its cami line, idling another 1,000 paychecks and hinting the shutdown could last through fall. Night shift diners closed first, then the daycare 2 blocks from Gate 2, then the tutoring center where machinists' kids once crammed for calculus. In community forums, temporary felt like a punchline. Mortgage deferrals and food bank hours became the new small talk. Local 444's meeting hall overflowed, yet answers were scarcer than overtime slots. One steward read Stellantis' statement aloud. Production adjustments tied to market conditions, and drew a chorus of hollow laughter. "They won't say tariff," a welder muttered, "but we all know what hit us." For Windsor, the prophecy was brutal and simple. If the first plant could fall this quietly, nothing was untouchable. And every shuttered loading dock added weight to a hard question echoing through boardrooms and living rooms alike. Could any profit margin survive a 25% toll? On a good year, the global auto business scrapes by on 4 to 5% operating profit, just enough to impress shareholders but far too thin to survive a body blow. The 25% border toll wasn't a bruise, it was a broken rib. Budget lab economists calculated that a levy of that size lifts the sticker price of an average new car by approximately $6,400 and vaporizes roughly $600 of purchasing power from every U.S. household. Multiply those dollars across assembly lines and the tab rockets toward $108 billion in extra costs for Big Three manufacturers alone. Inside finance suites, the arithmetic turned lethal. A $30K crossover rolling out of Oshawa now wore $7.5K in tariff weight. 2 years of net margin gone in one midnight stroke. Managers saw 3 doors, all bad. Absorb the hit-and-run losses until the bank revolver squeals. Pass it on, and watch customers bolt to cheaper imports from Europe or Asia. Uproot production to US or Mexican plants, spending billions to dodge a policy that could reverse with one election. A Ford-divisional CFO in Dearborn sketched the impact on a single whiteboard. Red arrows swallowed every line item except severance. One photo of that board leaked. The caption read, "We've left the realm of cost control and entered the realm of triage." On the shop floor side of the ledger, the math felt more intimate. A millwright who once cleared $34 an hour now faced a choice between early retirement and retraining on his own dime. Suppliers ran complex what-if spreadsheets showing that a 3% EBIT cushion evaporates after the second cross-border movement of a sub-assembly. Even the firms with long-term contracts discovered fine print. Force majeure clauses let automakers tear up agreements if tariffs hit profitability targets. One Ontario gasket maker lost 80% of its backlog in 48 hours, not to competitors but to spreadsheets flagged no longer viable. Yet the scariest number wasn't on any invoice. Analysts at Lazard warned that if margins slipped just another 1% industry-wide, more than a third of North American Tier 2 suppliers would tip into insolvency within 6 months. Every idle forklift, every repossessed CNC machine pushed the region closer to a supply chain heart attack. And still, the pressure kept building. Because while the ledger bled red, border checkpoints were morphing from choke points into cage matches, where yesterday's partners turned into today's rivals. Not long ago, the Detroit-Windsor corridor ran on an unspoken deal: compete on showroom floors, collaborate everywhere else. When a convoy protest briefly blocked the Ambassador Bridge in 2022, that handshake was worth nearly US $300 million in daily trade losses, proof that every maker's lifeline depended on the rival beside it. But tariffs rewrote the rules overnight, and the world's smoothest co-opetition morphed into a zero-sum street fight. Inside customs booths, friendship curdled into suspicion. A single piston that once ping-ponged across the border 4, or even 6, times is now dinged for a toll at each hop, turning a marvel of efficiency into death by toll booth as one supplier fumed. With margins already gutted, firms tore up decades-old joint venture clauses that mandated shared tooling or open CAD libraries. Everyone began ring-fencing intellectual property and renegotiating supply deals to keep neighbors from piggybacking on scarce tariff exemptions. The collapse of trust rippled faster than any spreadsheet. Companies once happy to share warehouse space or synchronized logistics now fought for exclusive dock slots, driving wait times and tempers higher. Where Tier 1s used to alert peers about a late axle run, they now hoard that intel, hoping competitors stumble first. Customs officers, drowning in reclassified invoices, quietly admit they prioritize the best-filled forms, turning paperwork wizardry into a competitive weapon. The border, designed for flow, has become a moat. And while North America infights, outsiders watch the cage match like scouts at ringside. Germany still leads the world in vehicle export value. Japan leads by volume. Both nations can now undercut tariff-bloated Detroit prices by thousands of dollars. As Canadian-US allies scrap over spreadsheets, foreign rivals seize the open lane, scooping up dealer shelf space and mindshare. Cooperation, once the continent's secret sauce, is now the meal ticket for its competitors. But the bruise runs deeper than balance sheets. In Section 6, Kitchen Table Crisis and Social Unravel, we'll follow the tariffs' shockwave from idled loading docks to living room budgets, where families discover the real cost of a broken handshake. Daniel and Marianne Kovich never thought their laminated maple table would turn into a war room. But 3 days after Daniel's layoff from Windsor Assembly, the spreadsheets came out. His $2,100 mortgage, her expiring health plan, their daughter's first-year tuition, all red numbers now that 3,000 Stellantis paychecks had vanished in a single plant pause. On the fridge, the family calendar still showed shift times that no longer existed. On the laptop, a job board refreshed to the same blank results. The Koviches are not alone. By mid-April, the tariff shock had pushed over 7,000 direct auto jobs and another 1,500 parts plant positions onto the curb across Ontario. Each lost assembly line badge yanks 7 more livelihoods: cafes, daycare aides, truckers, into the undertow. Night shift diners around Gate 2 went dark first, followed by the tutoring center across the street and the family-run garage that once bragged minivan specialists. Property tax revenue in Windsor is already projected to sag by $18 million, forcing City Council to freeze road repairs and cut bus routes. Food banks feel the math before the accountants do. The Unemployed Help Center logged a 27% jump in first-time users over the past year and warns the 2025 spike hasn't even peaked yet. Volunteer shelves once stacked for holiday hampers now empty by midweek as freshly laid-off electricians queue beside gig economy couriers. School boards brace for a 7% enrollment dip. When parents chase work out of town, or hunker down because they can't afford a move, Children vanish from classrooms, and entire grade levels merge to save payroll. Stress migrates from wallets to clinics. Windsor-Essex Children's Aid Society cites a surging caseload of mental health and behavioral files even as it slices 26 staff positions to plug a $10 million shortfall, the latest reminder that social services unravel fastest when families need them most. Hospital administrators, expecting benefits to lapse for thousands, quietly convert conference rooms into overflow counseling space. The culture of certainty that defined factory towns, go in, work hard, retire with a boat, has cracked. Guidance counselors now field questions they haven't heard in a generation. Is a factory job safer than a degree? Mortgage officers flag neighborhoods once considered bulletproof. And at every kitchen table, someone mutters the tariff's unspoken riddle. If the border can shut down our present overnight, what's left of the future? Yet in that vacuum, sketches of a new playbook are appearing. Retraining grants, battery startups, micro-credential boot camps promising to swap torque wrenches for torque vectoring algorithms. The same skyline that once glowed from blast furnace sparks now flickers with construction cranes. Ontario's auto belt, gutted by tariffs, has become the hottest zip code on the global EV map. More than $44 billion in electric vehicle and battery supply chain money is already signed, shovel in ground, or racing through city council boards. A few blocks south of Stellantis' silenced minivan line, its joint venture Nextstar Energy is pouring concrete for a 6 gigafactory campus that will stamp battery modules by early 2027 and reclaim roughly 2,500 of the jobs tariffs erased. The irony isn't lost on locals. The plant that tariffs crippled now sits across the street from the plant that tariffs can't touch. Batteries cross borders as parts, not finished cars, and face lighter levies. The St. Thomas wildcard. 2 hours east, Volkswagen subsidiary PowerCo SE is betting $7 billion on a cell gigafactory slated to hire 3,000 and fire up in 2027. Executives call it North America's energy density anchor, a polite way of saying Detroit's loss is becoming Berlin's foothold. Suppliers are already ring-fencing land along the 401 for cathode foil, electrolyte blends, and thermal management startups that didn't exist a year ago. Precision over volume. The new math rewards intellectual property, not tonnage. Drive unit contracts at GM's retooled CAMI and St. Catharines plants promise margins triple those of legacy exhaust manifolds. Instead of 200,000 identical minivans, Windsor may ship 20 million high-margin battery cells a year. Silicon, software, and chemistry wrapped in steel. Colleges turn into launch pads. Classroom seats that once fed line work now fill with laid-off technicians chasing micro-credentials in robotics, PLC coding, and battery pack quality control. The province fast-tracked its micro-credential strategy and opened an online portal where workers can stack bite-sized certificates in as little as 8 weeks, often on severance money. Sheridan College's evening automation shift cohort sold out in 13 hours. Mohawk's new solid-state battery course has a waitlist larger than its entire 2019 electromech program. Jason Muller, 26, is emblematic. 3 months after his stamping plant pink slip, he's soldering BMS sensor boards in a college lab that smells faintly of flux instead of axle grease. I figured if batteries are the new engines, I'd better learn to build the heart, not just the chassis, he laughs, then pauses. I'm betting my mortgage on it. Government sweeteners. Ottawa's and Queen's Park's matching tax credits, worth up to 30% of capex for clean tech manufacturing, mean that every private dollar lands with public wings. Critics call it an arms race of subsidies. Boosters call it the price of staying on the map. Either way, the checks are clearing and the cranes keep rising. The through line is unmistakable. Border tariff shock shattered the old volume game but cracked open a vault of electrified opportunity. Ontario won't build as many cars, but the pieces it does build, cells, drive units, battery software, carry margins the old internal combustion era could only dream of. Yet every boom writes its own fine print. Will smaller towns left off the battery corridor rebound or hollow out for good? And what happens if another policy whiplash tilts the ledger again? Tariffs cracked North America's biggest industrial alliance, but what happens next is still unwritten. One path is a political U-turn. Lobbyists in Washington and Ottawa are already whispering about sunset clauses, counter tariffs, and incentives that could roll the levy back before the 2-year grace window slams shut. If that reversal comes quickly enough, some assembly lines might roar back, paychecks might refill, and Windsor could pretend 2025 was just a bad dream. The other path is the battery bet, a full-tilt pivot from mass steel to high-margin chemistry, from how many engines per hour to how many watt-hours per kilo. It promises fewer jobs but better paid ones, fewer factories but smarter ones. Success means Ontario becomes the brain of North American electrification, exporting cells, software, and know-how, even if finished cars stay stateside. Both futures carry risk. Reversal could strand billions already sunk into gigafactories and micro-credential classrooms. Reinvention could leave whole towns behind if they miss the battery corridor's on-ramp. And nobody can guarantee that Washington's next headline, or the next election, won't yank the steering wheel again. So where would you place your chips? Do we fight for the rollback, double down on reinvention, or hedge across both and pray the politics cooperate? Drop your take below. Because the people living this story read the comments looking for answers just as much as news feeds.